the special meeting for tonight.
November 17th. November 17th.
November 17th. Roll call.
Mayor Anderson.
Here.
Council President Henderson. Here. Councilor Butterfield. Councilor Langer.
Here.
Councilor Clark and Councilor Grant, who I'm assuming will be here and have on her. Okay. Call forward your first applicant, Mayor.
Yeah.
Okay. That's good.
Our waters are for you, by the way. Hasn't been opened.
So one of the things, just for consistency, and Mary, I know you couldn't make it on Saturday, we do not have microphones. We are recording this. Mr. Claus especially wanted to make sure he could hear. That's why he's in the front row. But if you could speak a little louder for the benefit of everyone, that would be good. The interviews the other day went for about 20 to 25 minutes in general, just for consistency. So, anything else possibly that you wanted to maybe mention just for consistency, Council President Anderson? For the mayor's
Basically, we had the applicants just take 2 or 3 minutes, just as a sort of an opening statement to tell us a little bit about yourself that maybe is not reflected in the application. And then we just took turns sort of going up and down the line, and everybody asked 2 to 3 questions. So it was pretty simple. And then at the end, applicants had an opportunity to make a closing statement if they wanted to, or ask us any questions about the process going forward. Does that seem like an okay system?
Okay. So that's quick. I'm a native Oregonian. I was born and raised outside Fall Creek. So you recognize, if you're from Oregon, you might know where that is. If you're not, then
I do.
It's actually.
Been there many times.
It's in that Dexter Fall Creek corridor on the way to Oak Ridge between I-5 and on Highway 58. So that's probably not reflected in my application. I went to Oregon State University, was very active on campus. I was not active in kind of the student government. I actually was a newspaper reporter for 3 years at Oregon State, so I got to be involved in campus that way. There's a number of student league and those kinds of associations. To won a student leadership award, the Waldo Cummings Award. So started spending time on public service pretty early in my career. It's always been something that I've made time to take. Even when it wasn't necessarily always easy, I've always made sure that devoting myself to my community has been something I've taken time to do. I have served on numerous HOA boards everywhere we've lived. I've been, in fact, I was the transition rep between the builder and the homeowners in our last neighborhood, so that's not always, again, it's a detail-oriented position where you're trying to negotiate various interests. And I think that having taken on those kinds of roles is one of the things that professionally has maybe one of those. I really pride myself in building coalitions and bringing people together across the aisle, which is that part of how I have ended up spending a portion of my career now lobbying in St. Louis. But I feel my role is that to bring various interests together that don't always agree, to help bring them to the same table, to help provide solutions and policies that are good for all Oregonians. I am also currently running a $110 million venture capital fund. And that is something that 5 years ago, if you'd asked me if I'd be on the funding side rather than on the asking for money side of startups, I probably would have laughed. But it has been something that I was asked to step into a role that they needed someone, and I've spent the last 6 months kind of learning that part of the game. So I work with venture capitalists from around the country, as well as trying to build a better ecosystem for early stage startups in Oregon. And that's including helping to be a catalyst, helping my board to be a catalyst for the development of small regional funds that will ultimately help provide easier access to capital for early stage companies. And that ranges from small businesses that will never exit to companies that could be your next Fortune 500 company. So I thrive on taking on a variety of different types of roles. I've also served on special business committee for the city, and I continue to, been serving on planning commission, and I also was on the charter review committee. That was included.
Council Butterfield, did you want to go first?
Sure. This appointment's only a few months long, right? And I noticed that you are undecided as to whether you're going to run or not.
Yes.
I don't quite get the two.
I think that it's important that the voters have a choice. I mean, if it's something that it appears I would do well at and that would serve the community well, I'd be happy to run. But I also have sense that there may be people out there who might be interested in running, and I'd like to, rather than have them have to rush into doing that, to help give them that time to decide, and I'd be happy to do it on either an interim role or to run whatever would serve the community best.
So you feel like you kind of step into and see what it's about before you decided whether you run or not?
I would step in and see if there are other people, because I know there's some folks who are considering it, but it was just the timing of it, having to kind of rush into that it may not be the best timing for them. And so if in fact there were better quality, if there were candidates who were really interested, and I wouldn't stand in the way, I would help support them. But if it's something that I could provide value to the city, then I would continue to serve and I would run. Yes.
So you, when you talk about, I guess, trying out the position, I think the filing date is first week in January, so it wouldn't be a very long period of time for you to make that
I recognize that. I wouldn't necessarily
decision, but
yeah. I would just thinking of it as trying out, but I think that there are a few people that have talked to me so far that may be interested in running, and if they decided not to run, then I would be happy to file. So rather than trying out, I'd be making sure that there are, because there are great quality candidates that just the timing of trying to fill in a position may not be the right fit for them.
So one of my questions is, how do you think, or do you think serving on a board or a commission makes you, or enhances your ability to step into a role like this as a city councilor who needs to be up and running, right away?
Well, and I think the two committees, special committees that I served on, both charter review and the business committee, they came together very quickly. So we all had to learn, step in those roles very fast, catch work with you. And so I think that would be, it was good practice for having to step in very quickly into a role that wasn't necessarily expected over the next few months, but it would be something that I think that getting to know so many different interests, there was an opportunity with a number of the planning commission folks that we've had to take, to go and walk the neighborhoods and get to know some of the folks that are going to be impacted by various decisions, and I think that that's also been a benefit. So having to, again, deal with various interests, compete sometimes, your developers, your homeowners, your current residents. So I think that has been definitely good practice in preparation for this.
So do you think it is a skill that's valuable when you serve as a counselor, having been on a board or a commission prior to stepping into a role? I mean, it certainly was for me.
I think it is, and I actually think one of the biggest benefits is knowing the staff. I mean, being able to, learn how to communicate effectively together. I mean, so I think that the city has a wonderful staff, and I think that serving with them would probably be one of the highlights of serving on the council.
I agree. In my opinion.
I asked this the other night or the other morning to somebody else. Do you see a role that you, or a focus or an area, like different people? Some people are like, may not necessarily be a liaison, but it might be a liaison. I mean, you're on planning now. You've been on planning for a while, and is that kind of an area of interest, or do you kind of see yourself that is there some focus that you envision?
I'm always going to be interested in planning, and that would be something that would definitely be a very strong interest to serve as a liaison, just because that has been a long time. I was chair of the planning commission in Lafayette. I did some of my graduate work in that area. absolutely a passion, good planning and development is definitely something that I have a long-term interest in. But small business development is also totally the other area that I would be particularly focused. I would like to focus.
Do you have a question?
Sure. It looks like you lived in Sherwood for 3 years. What have you done in that time to build community in Sherwood?
I volunteer heavily with my children's schools, and I served on a number of boards and commissions here at the city. Continue to volunteer, newer community events, and those kinds of, I did I've done a turkey, give and gobble a couple years on Thanksgiving morning. I've been blessed to get to know a lot of folks who are heavily involved in volunteer activities, and so they're frequent recruiters. So they don't give you a lot of free time necessarily. There's going to be a way to make a full-time career just of volunteering time here, but now I volunteer primarily with my kids' schools. Smockville, Montessori, when my son was there at preschool, Archer Glen Elementary. So where the focus right now. And actually in St. Francis as well.
Of all that stuff, what would you say would be one of your most proud moments or highlights in your volunteer work?
The Charter Review Committee did a really good job working effectively together. It wasn't, different interests and perspectives, and I thought that committee was probably one of the best I've ever served on.
You're at the state all the time. What do you think the focus is going to be this year for the state when it comes to trying to fund issues for cities?
I think transportation is going to be something that, they recognize a lot of road issues are coming up. And we have, I think of our situation is slightly unique is that we have the state and the county and the city roads all kind of converging. I think I hear transportation coming up quite a bit. Small business development, economic development. We have a new director of business development at Business Oregon, Sean Robbins, and his focus is very heavily focused on growing companies internal to Oregon. So it's a shift in priority from recruiting large out-of-state companies to developing internal resources and internal companies. And I think you're going to see that reflected in some areas in the governor's agenda. Another is workforce development. We have numerous industries that are coming together on both, you've heard STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Over the last few years, you've heard CTE, career and technical education. Those interests are converging because they have thousands and thousands of jobs they cannot fill currently in Oregon because we do not have the talent that's trained and prepared. And it's reaching a critical phase, particularly within energy and healthcare. Those two areas have, and building trades, for instance, so many of the people who are currently in those jobs are retiring out. You just can't fill them fast enough. So you're going to hear a lot about workforce development, and you're going to hear industry kind of working on that. So I think that when the governor's budget released in early December, that should be a priority for this week.
The time that you spent here in the city, you actually spent time working with your kids and sports, recreation, those types of things. As a member of our city, what do you think is your best asset to bring to council, other than, being able to work with the community? I'd like to know something technical about you.
I focused, my graduate degree is in public administration, and I did a certificate in public sector financial management as part of that. I have done budgets ranging from $1 million a year with the programs to $143 million a year when I was with Portland Development Commission. So learning how to read financials and budgets and dig into the details, I think, and having been a program manager, and I've run STEM programs, I've run higher education programs, I've run programs throughout, in business, I've run a business. I think that having that experience, particularly that as a small business owner, is something that would be really valuable as well. So I know that that's something that you have a perspective as well. And I think that right now we're doing a lot of really great things here, but I think that our small business, they need to have additional support. So it's great to see how can we look at best practices throughout the region and help reflect those into our city. So, And I do have, I'm lucky to know many of the economic development directors here in the region because I work with them, because prior to there being, Mark Clemens from Hillsborough was economic development director when I was at Portland Development Commission. You know, I've known him for years. So, I mean, there's a number of people throughout the region who have those positions that I can call upon quickly and say, you know, hey, what are some of the ideas? What have we done for your small business community? And that's an asset, definitely, the contacts and connections that I can bring, and maybe in a different way than people who currently been serving have. You know, there's different kind of augment of what's currently there.
Just to coattail off that, in your three most important issues section, you put, city must look for opportunities and solutions to address the growing number of empty storefronts within our community.
Mm-hmm.
So we have an economic development program. Have you ever read the economic development?
I have.
So we look for opportunities to be a resource to people who are interested in moving here, but we're not really in the business of, I guess, marketing storefronts, you know, like a commercial real estate person is. But the challenge of that is often a challenge of transportation. Is how do you get people want to locate Sherwood when we have the transportation challenges we have? And so, and then you mentioned, as the city grows, I'd like to see the council explore having a Parks and Recreation Board, Recreation Board think of its resources in a new direction, particularly with the performing arts center opening. So are you talking about a district?
I would be interested in Parks and Recreation District. I miss being part of the Parks and Recreation District. And
So a taxing district?
Potentially, yes. I mean, if it's a benefit to the city, I mean, it doesn't have to be a tremendous cost. And I see the benefits that, you know, that it's had at $12 Parks and Rec. I mean, we love to be, and I would we've continued to make use of neighbors Parks and Recreation District since we moved here, as well as relatives. So, you know, and we're having to travel outside the city currently in order to, you know, have those resources.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of folks here who'd love to see more of the Parks and Recreation District have those, you know, it also helps make available classes and programming at a lower cost throughout the community, so that it's not just, oh, you're a member. I mean, because the YMCA is wonderful, but the fact is, and they don't offer the same scope that our traditional Parks and Recreation District does. And it's also quite expensive if you're not already paying the additional fees. So, and I think by having a Parks and Recreation District, I know that McMinnville, you had a lot of volunteer labor that was able to help run those, and the same thing with 12, and they have, you know, those advocates who can help you run programs for a much lower cost, so that they're accessible to everybody within the community, not just a select people.
Because we've looked at that, the council has looked at that a number of times, and there are pros and cons to having a district, but you have to understand we have a tax compression issue. So if we were to enact a district, what's unique about Newburgh is that district was enacted in 1972. Long time ago. It was probably pennies on the dollar then, and somebody had the vision to say, hey, this is something that we need. And now what they're doing is they're struggling with the capital to maintain those facilities that they have down in Newburgh. I know they have a pool fund going, and
They just recently passed their bond.
right. And so that took a huge outreach, and then they have the Jalen Valley Cultural Center, which is also a capital expense that they're doing private and public funding. So it's something that we've considered already. The challenge is that we only have so much general fund to spend on essential services, and I don't know how we would do that without, like I said, enacting a taxing district. Because we'd either have to cut library services or cut public works to provide a non-essential service like that. And I also travel outside the city to take classes. But given the tax base that we have, I think it would be a challenge to do it in the near future.
Well, we have resources. We have the partner. We have the YMCA building. We have
Sure.
a project with them. We have, you know, the Performing Arts Center that's going to be coming online. I mean, it's definitely worth looking into, at least, to see what kinds of opportunities can we create for our citizens for programming. And
Well, we did a survey in 2007, and the #1 requested programming was culinary arts.
then I feel I've taken culinary arts classes. school junkie. Yep. It's
So,
a lot of fun.
You know, it's been something that we've looked at for a number of years, and so I agree with you that it's something, we all like to never have to leave Sherwood hardly, ever, to get the things that we need or that we want. But sometimes the real hard part is figuring out how to convince people to expand that ever-shrinking paycheck.
And it could be a foundation, and there could be a number of different models that, I mean, as you said, it was looked at in 2007. I'd love to see what kinds of opportunities there are now. Is it, you know, I know that Benville uses foundations, and they do their after-school care programming through a foundation that's, you know, assisted by the city. You know, there could be any number of unique ways that we might look at. It's just something that's an area of interest, because I know that for some, it's always easy to travel outside the city to access programming, and so what we do is we end up having those who can travel and those who cannot travel, and so there are a lot of kids in the community who miss out, and there are kids who miss out even on the sports, because not every parent can commit to, like, you know, twice a week practices and the games, and so what are the kind of programming opportunities that we're offering for those kids? Because we do have a large number of kids who are involved in the community through those activities currently, but what are we doing if we're not having Parks and Recreation District, or we don't have a foundation running those kinds of classes at an accessible way, then what are we doing for those kids?
Not just kids, but seniors too.
Seniors, I mean, throughout the spectrum.
Those are great answers. I'm very impressed. Plus, you're an Oregon Stater. That's always good. So, no, I appreciate you coming tonight. I didn't have any questions. It's kind of covered the answers.
Very impressive resume. Have you been looked at all at the Southwest Border Plan or something like that?
We have, from the planning commission perspective,
Right.
yeah, looked at it, from a kind of, we're just about to be digging in a little bit more, but, transportation is absolutely going to be one of the #1 issues facing our city, you know, for the long term. It's not going to go away easily. It's not something that will likely ever go away. I'm very interested to see how Brookman develops, to see if there's mechanisms, you know, how that impacts our transportation, if that could ease, you know, some of the routes that they're looking at along Brookman, if that will ease our transportation inside the city at all. You know, I haven't looked at it in great detail yet.
The county, you know, their failure of their registration tax too, they're gonna have to come back, and the last meeting we had, they're not going to, and they're just not gonna put the fee on. They do have the authority, but they said at this time they're not going to, so they'll be pretty much restricted on all that revenue we would have gotten from them too. So you're right, roads are probably gonna be the biggest issue coming up financially for the city.
I mean, for the next decades, and it's not just a short-term issue that's going to go away in a couple of years. I mean, even if that had passed, it was not going to be panacea. It was not going to solve every issue.
Right.
And I think that people in this family did even fail to realize that it wasn't going to fix every issue. So we were still going to have a critical issue, you know, critical cycle going on with our transportation. I think that the changes out here on 99 with the legal complex. It's going to be interesting to see how that helps or hurt, you know, how that impacts as well. They're going to be adding an exit directly into that. I understand that's part of the plan. We're still negotiating.
An entrance and an exit.
Entrance and exit
Yeah.
from 99.
Right. Part of it, I don't know if the county's going to fund that or we're going to fund it, but that's in the plans. So, no, very impressed. Thank you. Do you have something else?
I have one other question. I'm sure Beth's going to remember this, but you told me at an event that your family would leave Sherwood if Walmart came to town because the tax burden on the city residents would be too high.
I'm not sure if all of those exact words. I may have expressed concern. I was concerned when Walmart came. You know,
But the tax burden question is the question I still cannot understand, that there would be a tax burden upon the residents of Sherwood because Walmart came to town for all the people that would be affected or can't come into town and would need social services that we would be providing.
No, I think if you think in terms of transportation, and we were just discussing transportation, I am concerned about the transportation costs of increased development without I mean, we're discussing right now how our transportation issues are going to be impacting us for the next decades. And then if we look at a complex like that, yeah, it could, if it's gonna hit the wallets, you know, and that may be short-sighted, will we move? No, it's a wonderful community. We definitely, you know, continue to help build that community, build the community. And, you know, since it's been built, I've continued to volunteer, have continued to get actually more involved in the city. But no, I don't recall saying.
We were at Magnus Tree Farm.
It still remains a concern. How are we going to do development and address our transportation issues within the city?
Any more questions? Close.
Manager?
That's adjourned.
Thank you.
Well, as far as process goes, we don't have any other applicants, correct?
At this time, no.
So these individuals have withdrawn, even though we have their applicants still here?
No, Counselor, they have not withdrawn, so let me back up, Mayor, on your adjournment. No, they have not withdrawn. They just have not responded to their availability to attend the posted meetings that the council has scheduled.
Okay, so for the courtesy of Beth, I think everyone else was here, so she understands the process we go through at the council and how that plays out.
Ballot vote.
The ballot thing and all that.
So at this point, if the council chooses not to hold any other interviews, and you have completed your interview process, then the next step would be to have a ballot voting process. So that process has to occur in an open meeting. At the next available scheduled open meeting, the council must, you'll be provided with the ballot. The ballot will have the names of the applicants, not necessarily the names of the applicants that participated in the interview. As the code reads, it's the names of the applicants. So that ballot will have all names of the applicants. For the applicant to proceed to a vote, the applicant must receive a nomination and a second before that applicant can then be voted upon. So if an applicant does not receive a nomination and a second, that then eliminates that applicant from being voted on. And it's just a matter of a process of elimination. So you get an applicant that receives the majority of the council votes. Upon that being determined, the council can then at that time declare that seat filled, Councilor Folsom's seat filled by that applicant. If the council chooses, that applicant can be sworn in at that time or at a future date.
That makes sense.
You talked about drawing up a resolution on this, correct?
Yes, and we can there, we don't have to. So just a matter of how formal you want to do that. I'm working with the city attorney right now just to draft a little paragraph of language that upon the conclusion of the appointment process and the voting process, the mayor then can then formally have a little statement to insert that individual into that seat. Any other questions?
At what point in the agenda would that occur?
Technically, it would be under the new business. If, you know, it's not a public hearing, that would probably be the best place to have it, would be under new business.
Okay. And I got to see are the interviews?
They are.
They are now, okay.
There's some emails that you received late this afternoon with some links, so it's out on YouTube now,
Oh, okay.
our YouTube channel.
That was the one that was being held up for a while, right?
Yeah, it's being processed today, so.
Thank you, Beth, for coming
Thank you.
down.